Hey everyone, so Marco, one of the strongest characters in the entire One Piece world, has just arrived to aid the Alliance, and right away he's shown why he's such a high-impact character, seemingly taking out the Big Mom pirates on the waterfall yet again. And as soon as I saw this happen, the first thing I thought was, yeah, it's probably over for the Alliance. Why do I say that? Alright, well first we have to rewind back to the start of Wano, where the first timeline for the arc that we were given was Basil Hawkins' prediction regarding Luffy's survival chances 1 month down the line. Yet shortly afterwards we were told that the huge raid on Onigashima will be 2 weeks down the line. So right away that was a red flag for me, and for long-time viewers you know my reasons for why I have always believed that the Onigashima raid will fail. But let me do a quick recap for new viewers before explaining why Marco's arrival specifically seems like the last nail in the coffin for the Alliance's chances in Onigashima. So, in general, most big One Piece arcs follow the same basic structure, where the initial mission they have upon arriving at the island fails, they pick themselves back up, and then they move forward with a new mission that succeeds. In Alabasta, they initially tried to stop the rebellion by going after Crocodile at Rain Base. They failed, Luffy lost, they had to regroup and stop the war in Aluberna. In Thriller Bark, they initially tried to get Nami, Usopp, and Chopper back. They failed, they lost their shadows, they had to go back in for round 2. In Water 7, they initially tried to get Robin back twice and failed both times. First at Iceberg's mansion, then during the Sea Train battle, and then finally they decided to go after Enies Lobby itself, and succeeded. In Dressrosa, Law initially had a plan to cleanly take out Doflamingo. Things got messy, they failed, Luffy ended up having to defeat Doflamingo himself. So on and so on. I'm not going to recap the entire series, but this is how things always go. The initial mission they have inevitably fails. And you can go catch my video on why the Fire Festival will fail if you want more information on that. It's only after getting back on their feet do the protagonists succeed, and that's very important because that phase is generally where Oda can really raise the drama and the stakes of the arc. Now, when I first started pushing the idea a year ago that this Fire Festival raid will fail, I got a lot of pushback, and as Act 2 progressed, the sentiment that the Fire Festival is clearly the final battle grew and grew. Why? Because it simply seemed too big to fail. They've been calling it the final battle over and over. They've spent 2 weeks getting the ships, getting the weapons, getting the men. This seems like it is all set up to really be where it all ends. But what we have to keep in mind is that this is still the initial mission. Yes, it seems way bigger and way grander and way more definite than all of the previous initial missions in One Piece that ended in failure, but what we have to keep in mind is that Wano is the culmination to what is, by far, the biggest, longest running storyline in One Piece. In past videos, I've explained why this whole storyline, starting from Punk Hazard onwards, has in fact been the first real super saga in the series. Just a mega storyline that is all coming to a head in Wano. As such, as soon as Kinemon explained his plan to take out Kaido, and that it would take place in 2 weeks, I immediately saw it again as an initial mission that was doomed to fail. It just seemed like a much, much bigger initial mission than any of the previous times, because this is a much, much bigger storyline. Again, Wano is the conclusion to a storyline that has been building for over 300 chapters, so whatever the point of failure is, it's going to have to be much more significant than something like, oh, let's go take Crocodile out at Rain Base. Oh, we failed? Okay, we can still get to Aluberna by afternoon. Again, the 1 month timeline Hawkins mentioned is probably not meaningless, and it seems to be a very strange thing to have dropped on the reader right before telling us about a plan that takes place 2 weeks down the line instead. So, now I admit, early on this was all very speculative on my part, and as Act 2 progressed, I started to believe myself that this whole thing was just too big to fail. And so now let me explain why everything that's happened since the start of Act 3 up till this chapter, Marco's arrival, has made me confident that this is going to be the biggest failure the Straw Hat crew have experienced since Marineford. To start with, Wano is structured after the 5-act Kabuki plays, and as we all know, Act 3 is generally supposed to be the point of great drama or tragedy. As Oden's backstory began at the start of Act 3, many people believed that this was going to be that point of tragedy. We knew Oden was going to die from the start, and we knew that his death was what led Wano to what it became today. everything seemed to point to Act 3 being centered around Odin's death. And then after that, maybe we could have Act 4 with the big battle, and then maybe Act 5 as the post-action epilogue. But after Odin died, nothing happened. After the traitor was revealed, nothing happened. And even as people kept waiting and waiting for Act 3 to conclude, somehow the battle already seems to be getting started, and there's no signs of a stopping point. So if Odin's backstory wasn't the great moment of drama and tragedy, then as I initially believed, it's very possible that the great tragedy is the raid on Onigashima itself. And another reason I say this is, as I talked about in a recent video, the tone in Act 3 has been very, very light ever since Kyoshiro revealed himself. Kanjuro revealed himself. Kyoshiro revealed himself to be a good guy from then on. The tone has been very light. This is the final battle for storyline that spans a third of the series. Yet the Straw Hats, as we saw even this chapter, wandering around the brothel and such, they're not even as serious as they were heading into the battle at Arlong Park. We're not seeing them as serious as they were heading to Aluberna. We're not seeing them as serious as they were when they decided to leave for Enies Lobby. This has not been a particularly heavy situation for them. Yes, Luffy and Zoro are now running into some trouble, but there are still a lot of gags flying around. It's not like this is the same sort of Luffy as the one who was staring down the Tower of Justice as he declared war on the world. And to those that say that Oda already got the failure of the arc out of the way when Luffy lost to Kaido and was sent to Udon, what's important is that incident similarly had no effect on the tone or the attitudes of any of the main characters. This of course makes sense, as we're at a point in the series where Luffy wouldn't have his confidence shaken by one defeat, and we wouldn't expect the crew to lose their faith in Luffy from one defeat either, after having Oda highlight over and over throughout the New World how much their faith in him has become seemingly absolute. As such, having characters maintain a general air of confidence and positivity throughout most of the arc, even heading into the supposed big battle, is most likely a setup for them to experience a real major failure or defeat on a much more dramatic scale. Something that would actually shake them up and shift the tone. Again, this mission has been built up as too big to fail, and they're going into it with extreme confidence. And that brings me to my main point. Besides the fact that initial missions in One Piece end in failure, besides the fact that Act 3 is meant to be tragic, besides the fact that the Straw Hats are going into this with extreme confidence and the tone is extremely light so far, the last big point that comes from chapter 981 specifically is that we are now done getting reinforcements. The remaining Scabbard members, Denjiro, Nekomamushi, and Izo are all finally here. Jinbei, the long-awaited missing Straw Hat, he's already made his return. Marco, the big gun, the most powerful ally that they could call upon, he finally showed up. Even the Kid Pirates are already here, they've been here. All the potential cavalry members have arrived. And the important point is, they all arrived before things actually got rough. Why is that so important? Generally in any story, movies, TV, books, manga, whatever, if you have a major conflict where the odds are stacked against the heroes, but beforehand, you've set up several cavalry pieces, basically backup characters who could potentially arrive to make a difference, and who can show up at any time. Generally, the author is doing this so that the heroes can have outs. The author can make things get extremely tough for the heroes during the conflict, and then have cavalry pieces come in to turn the tide at crucial moments. You can write a battle where the heroes ultimately win, but where there can be more ups and downs, where you can reasonably construct hopeless scenarios and then bring in a get out of jail free card that you planted earlier. Basically, the larger the number of cavalry pieces that Oda had in his back pocket going into the Onigashima battle, the more likely it was that he was planning out an extended battle that was ultimately going to end in success for the Straw Hats. But it looks to me now like a lot of these pieces Oda was saving, pretty much all of them, was just him blowing smoke. Yes, with Kyoshiro, with Jinbei, with Marco and his group, each time their arrival did have an impact, but it was always extremely basic. Taking out some ships, or sure, even delaying the Big Mom Pirates, but what's important is that in each of these scenarios, these reinforcements arrived to a situation that wasn't actually that dire. Long-range ships are not going to be much more than an inconvenience for these Straw Hats. That's not like a lion's threatening danger. The Big Mom Pirates are of course a major threat, but it's not like they had the heroes' backs against the wall. They didn't have the heroes' backs against the wall in that particular moment. The Big Mom Pirates weren't even at the actual conflict yet. And again, generally the point of setting up cavalry beforehand and saving their arrival is to allow the conflict to get to a point where the main characters seemingly cannot succeed, where their backs are against the wall, and then having a way for them to still be able to come back from it. And I know you might be thinking that I'm making, sweeping generalizations here, that every time an author sets up a cavalry piece doesn't necessarily mean he is planning out the beats of a conflict where a heroic save is needed. Maybe Oda just wanted Marco to mirror King's scene of knocking the Big Mom Pirates down the waterfall, and he didn't plan any sort of clutch arrival in the nick of time to save the protagonists. That in itself is fine, but it's the totality of what has happened. Oda had set up a lot of potential last-minute arrivals. He didn't just have Marco arrive like this. Oda has very rapidly burned through all of these guys. Denjiro, Jinbei, Kid, Marco, Nekomamushi, Izo, even just the guys locked up in the Flower Capital. They have all shown up really, really early in what you would expect to be an extended final battle. And all of their arrivals had minimal effect and weren't necessarily big rescues. Basically, from here on out, there will be no clutch saves. There will be no long-awaited arrivals that turn the tide when everything seems lost. This is a setup where Oda is having the Straw Hats go in, extremely confident, and on top of that, he is literally just adding to it by saying, here, you can even start with all of the special pieces you've been waiting on too. This is not going to be a situation where the Straw Hats go in confident, then things start getting bad, and then it begins to seem hopeless, and then some last-minute game-changing allies show up that allow the protagonists to rally and overcome the situation and ultimately win. They've already got it all. They are officially fully stacked. At this point, the setup that makes the most sense is basically Oda building them up before they fall. Marco and the remainder of the Minks were the last group that had me thinking, okay, the fact that Oda is still saving them, the fact that we haven't seen them, the fact that Oda is still saving some key players, means that maybe he's planning for things to get really bad at Onigashima, and then have these guys show up, turn the tide, and give the protagonists a chance to make a comeback to win the battle. Now that's not happening anymore. Now, some of you might be saying, okay, well maybe Oda just wants to avoid cliches. Sure, he set up all these cavalry pieces, and normally you would expect these types of reinforcements to all show up together at a time when all hope seems lost, to give the heroes a shot at a comeback. But maybe Oda just wanted to avoid that trope, and that's why he just had them all show up really, really early. The thing is, yes, what I'm talking about is technically a cliche, but it is an extremely, extremely effective staple of storytelling. When there's a big heroic entrance of friends coming in as backup when the heroes need help the most, that is pretty much always a guaranteed feel-good moment. Make everything seem hopeless, and then, never mind, friends are here. It doesn't matter if we've seen it countless times before, it's used because it's so effective, it just works. It's usually a great way to get a strong positive reaction out of the reader or viewer or whoever. And Oda's done that before in this series, so it's not like he's gonna be suddenly oh, I'm above that. No, it's really effective. There's no reason not to use it. It's one of those cliches where it's way more often than not going to be better to have that missing ally show up at a crucial moment where the heroes desperately need a save, than to have the ally just show up in some minor way, like, say, taking out a ship that's kind of far away. It's kind of like saying, oh, Luffy beating Lucci was such a cliche. The hero beating the villain is a cliche. No, there's a reason we see it so often. That's generally going to be the best route for the story to go. And if the author deliberately goes a different route, then there's likely to be a strong story reason for it. There needs to be something better than following that cliche. In this case, that would be, as I see it, having all the allies show up early so that the alliance can be crushed at full strength. And again, I think this because of the totality of it, not just that one or two of the allies came back in a fairly straightforward manner, it's the fact that not a single one of them was being saved for a big moment or a big save in the heat of the conflict. Lastly, I'll acknowledge the obvious possibility of reinforcements showing up that have simply not been on our radar so far. In general, with this setup, where there is a battle going on in an isolated country, a country specifically known for its isolatedness, reinforcements showing up besides the previously mentioned parties, Marco, Kid, Jinbei, Kyoshiro, Nekomamushi, Izo, etc., it would be really, really hard to do right. I'm not saying it's impossible, but if the day were to be saved by, say, the Revolutionary Army popping up because Sabo wants to help Luffy, I think that would be a problem. It's just a little too random, out of the blue. Now, on the other hand, Shanks and the red-haired pirates, I agree they have a better case for showing up due to the Odin connection, though I personally feel that some hint or piece is missing to make it feel like the red-haired pirates are a natural addition to the arc. For example, in Marineford, Shanks' arrival was a surprise, but it was not out of the blue, when he showed up at the end of the Marineford War. He had been getting involved with the conflict on the sidelines multiple times at that point, meeting with Whitebeard to try and prevent it all in the first place, stepping in to stop Kaido on the day of the war as well. So there had been hints that Shanks was on the perimeter of that conflict that entire time in some way. He had some level of investment in it. And at the same time, if Shanks or someone like him, a Yonko, were to show up here, it would be almost too big of an alliance boost that would basically win the war for them in a sense. The Grand Fleet would be really weird, as there's literally no reason for them to want to go help Luffy at the moment, as where we left off with them was that Luffy would give them a shout if he needed their help. Right now there's no reason to expect that they would think that Luffy needs help. If anything, again, failure at Onigashima makes more sense, as that could be the necessary damage to get Luffy's Vivre card to start burning, which would then alert them to come and become involved in Wano. Lastly, the parties that I personally believe make the most sense to arrive would be the Marines, as we've been getting plenty of cutaways to the Marines keeping tabs on the Wano situation and becoming more and more concerned, as well as the fact that the Marines already seem to be making some moves to start incorporating the SSG. And most importantly, an arrival like the Marines would be most fitting for if the battle ended in failure. It wouldn't be a heroic rescue, it wouldn't be a group coming in to win the war for them, rather it would be an interfering third party that provides an opportunity for the heroes to escape. Similarly, one of the worries the Alliance had over the Onigashima raid failing was that there would be no other chances to defeat Kaido and Big Mom if this didn't work, as if this failed, then the Yonko could simply wipe them out in the Wano mainland afterwards. But if a third party like the Marines arrived with serious intent to combat the Kaido-Big Mom alliance, then suddenly the Yonko would have much bigger fish to fry, and that would give them a long-term window of opportunity for the Straw Hats to regroup and pick themselves back up, possibly opening things up to that 1 month long timeline that Hawkins mentioned. And the last possibility that I view as less likely is Blackbeard's arrival, simply because Blackbeard is an opportunist whose surprise arrival anywhere doesn't really feel unwarranted to me, especially considering his mysterious mission in chapter 956. But I'm still betting on the Marines over Blackbeard at the end of the day. So that's all for this video. If you enjoyed, then definitely like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you all later.